all of us are flooded by enormous amounts of information and distraction. I mean, this is the most distracted age in history. And to really understand the world all your life, you need some peace and quiet. You need some sanctuary from this enormous flood. And for me, meditation provides this sanctuary. Sometimes people try to meditate to have some unique experience of bliss or of peacefulness or whatever. That's not the point. The point is to understand your normal self, who you really are. What are your mental weaknesses? How you are when you're bored, or when you're angry, or when you're fearful. If you get to know that, that's much more important than having, I don't know, an hour of some special experience. I think without this practice of meditation, I would not be able to write my books or to try and understand what's happening in the world.
So what do you understand is happening in the world?
We are facing enormous challenges, unprecedented challenges. I mean, when you try to look beyond the constant news cycle of every day, I think three major threats present themselves as major threats to human civilization itself. And these are nuclear war and ecological collapse and technological disruption. I think the most important thing to know about living in the 21st century is that humans are now hackable animals. To hack a human being means to understand that human better than he or she understands themselves, which was never possible in history before on a massive scale. I mean, on an individual level, yes. My mother, at least until a certain age, knew me better than I knew myself. And that was good, because her interests were aligned with mine. And then after a certain age, it's not so good if your mother still knows you better than you know yourself. But it's much, much worse if there is a corporation or a government, rather than a parent, that knows you better than you know yourself.
Does it have to be worse?
Again, it could be used for good purpose. I'm not saying let's stop all technological progress. But if it falls into the hand of a 21st century Stalin, the result is the worst totalitarian regime in history. And we already have a number of applicants for the job of 21st century Stalin. So we need to be very, very careful about it. What I meant is that Homo sapiens is now acquiring technologies that can either destroy us or upgrade us, but will not leave us as we are. Authority will gradually shift from us to these corporate or government algorithms that will increasingly decide almost everything about our life. You apply to the bank to get a loan, it's an algorithm that decides. You apply to get a job, it's an algorithm. Even questions like what to study or whom to marry will increasingly be decided by these algorithms. To stay in the game, you need to get to know yourself better. Also, in order to protect yourself against being manipulated by these external forces.
What do you say to those who say, none of this is new, heard it all before, you're sensationalizing what is going on at present, not interested? To which you say what?
Yeah, some things are old, but you now have the biology to understand not only what I say and who I meet, but actually how I feel and what I think. So think 10, 20 years in the future, in North Korea or someplace like that, every citizen has a biometric bracelet on the hand. And they follow not just where you go, but how you feel. If there is a big speech by the big leader on the radio, and everybody must listen, you can smile and you can clap your hands, but they know that you're actually angry. This is a kind of power that nobody in history ever had. It's far beyond even George Orwell's 1984. And this is not science fiction. It's not 1,000 years in the future. Some regimes are already starting to build these total surveillance systems even now. We have 10, 20 years to do something about it. If we take the wrong decisions, maybe there is no way back. once you establish a kind of digital dictatorship that has this kind of knowledge of everybody, there is absolutely no way to destroy the system from within.
It seems at the end of this new global order, how important is that there is that disconnect?
That's extremely dangerous, because if we get into an arms race situation with AI, with genetics, with biotechnology, it almost guarantees the worst outcome. Because no matter what dystopian scenario you think about, no matter what dangerous technological development you think about, in an arms race situation, the thinking will be, hey, we don't want to do it, but the Chinese are doing it, or the Iranians are doing it, or the Israelis are doing it, and we can't be left behind, so even though it's dangerous, we'll do it first. And the other guys will say the same thing. And if we get into this arms race mentality, then it doesn't matter who wins the arms race, the loser will be humanity.
Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future for humanity as we understand it today?
I try to be a realist. I mean, I would say that humanity, for humans now, the situation is better than in any previous time in history. Second, the situation is still quite bad. And third, the situation can become much, much worse. Whether you call this optimism or pessimism, that's really up to you. And as a historian, I can say that we should never underestimate human stupidity. It's one of the most powerful forces in history.
We live in an era where we discuss the demise of the New World Order, the rise of nationalism and populism alongside the evolution of big tech. I think this is what you are alluding to when you talk about the rise of this sort of this autocratic environment that we should be so concerned by. What happened to liberal democracy?
What we've seen over the last few years is people losing faith in the story of liberal democracy, and it's not absolutely clear why, because actually the last 20 or 30 years, under the protection of the global liberal order, were the best times in history for humankind. In the 20th century, we had a big battle between three stories: the communist story, the fascist story, and the liberal story. And the fascist story was knocked out in the Second World War, and for something like 30 years, we had just one story to explain the past and to guide us to the future, and now this story is collapsing. We are left with a vacuum, zero stories, which is the most frightening situation to be in. The vacuum is tentatively filled by all kinds of nostalgic fantasies, nationalist fantasies, religious fantasies. But what is common to all these fantasies? They don't offer any viable vision for the world as a whole, and they don't offer any viable vision for the future. The only thing we know for certain is that by 2050, the world will be completely different from today. It's really the first time in history that we have no idea what the job market would look like in 30 years, what skills people will need in 30 years. There will be jobs. Some jobs will disappear, but new jobs will emerge, and other jobs will be transformed. And we just don't know how and what skills will be needed, which is really frightening, because this is a question we need to answer now, not in 20 or 30 years. We need to know what to teach kids today in school or in college.
What do we teach children today?
The most important skill is how to keep learning and keep reinventing yourself throughout your life, which means you need, above all else, a lot of emotional intelligence and a lot of mental flexibility. How to keep reinventing yourself repeatedly throughout your life, because the big struggle in the 21st century will not be against exploitation, like in the 20th century. It will be against irrelevance. How do I stay relevant to this fast-moving world?
Yuval, what happened in 2016? You talk about a useless class, sort of looking back through the prism of nostalgia and the rise of sort of populism and nationalism. The result, what happened?
So I think part of what happened in 2016 in many parts of the world is that, even people who don't follow the latest developments in AI or bioengineering and all these big words, machine learning and the big data and all these things, they are correctly sensing that they are in danger of becoming irrelevant, and they are revolting against that and saying, hey, we still have a lot of power, at least the power of mayhem, and they have succeeded in capturing the attention of everybody. I think that the real problem is that to deal with any of the major issues we are facing, we need to do it on a global level, and we are running in the opposite direction.
Yuval, what keeps you up at night?
I try to sleep well. I don't like to stay awake at night if I don't have to. I think that my main worries are more like these cosmic or philosophical worries. I think that we are really facing a philosophical bankruptcy, that we don't have the ideas or the outlook to really deal with the powers that we are acquiring. The basic deal between philosophers and politicians has always been that philosophers have these fancy ideas how to change the world, change humanity, and the politicians come and say, well, we don't have the means to realize your ideas, sorry very much. But now it's the opposite situation. The politicians will soon get into their hands the technology to create heaven or hell, but the philosophers are having difficulty conceptualizing the new heaven and the new hell fast enough. These questions are now migrating from the Department of Philosophy to the Department of Engineering. And whereas philosophers are very, very patient people, they can discuss an issue for thousands of years and not agree on an answer and be okay with it. Engineers are impatient, and the people who pay the engineers are even more impatient. If you want to put a self-driving vehicle on the road, you need to solve all kinds of ethical dilemmas and issues about free will that has been argued about for thousands of years, but you want to do it next year or in 5 years. So I think now, if the philosophers don't do their job, the engineers will do that job too, and that's very dangerous.